While Republicans seem somewhat split on whether to condemn or support Donald Trump in the wake of his 37-count federal indictment, it seems that just about every Republican lawmaker, along with the right-wing media, seem to be in agreement that there is a, quote, two-tiered justice system, that somehow the FBI in particular is out to target Republicans. And as someone who supports our local cops, sheriff's departments, state troopers, and the FBI, and who criticizes the left when they unfairly target our cops, I am troubled by this push to turn the FBI into a caricature, suggesting they're all a bunch of political hacks out to get political leaders on the right. An FBI that's led by Republican Chris Wray, who was appointed by President Trump. An FBI that has never in its history had a Democratic leader.
This was the Justice Department being politicized and going after their political opponent.
You need a DOJ that's fair. In order to really see that play out, and we're just not getting that from this DOJ and politicized.
This FBI that is completely out of control and is assisting one side of politics to prosecute their political enemies.
This is baffling. Put aside that the FBI is led by a Trump-selected Republican, actions speak louder than words, right? The FBI critics never talk about all the high-profile Democrats the Bureau's been going after, even just in the last year or two. Former Democratic Congressman T.J. Cox of California, we've talked about him, arrested in August on charges of fraud, money laundering, campaign violations, could be facing upwards of 20 years in prison. He claims it's all political. Or Karen Carter Peterson, the former head of the Louisiana Democratic Party. She pled guilty to one count of wire fraud, sentenced to 22 months in prison after an FBI investigation found she defrauded donors out of more than $100,000 to feed a gambling addiction. Or Democratic Tallahassee, Florida Mayor Andrew Gillum, who ran against Ron DeSantis for governor. Last June, hit with conspiracy and wire fraud charges. Last month, jurors acquitted Gillum on account of making false statements, couldn't reach a verdict on 18 other conspiracy and wire fraud counts against both he and a co-defendant. He has maintained the FBI investigation and prosecution is political, a witch hunt even. And did you even know that the FBI is actively investigating a prominent Democratic U.S. Senator right now and his wife, looking into whether Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey, chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and his wife accepted lavish gifts like a Mercedes-Benz, a luxury apartment in D.C., money, jewelry, in exchange for political favors. But you see, this investigation and these stories don't fit the narrative. The left-wing media has no interest in exposing, their own, but it certainly doesn't fit the far-right echo chamber that the FBI is somehow just out to get Republican political leaders. It's an issue I have discussed with top Republican lawmakers who often seem surprised by the question. It seems to me sometimes that the FBI critics never talk about all the instances when the Bureau goes after Democrats. You just feel like this stuff never gets mentioned when blasting the FBI.
Credit is due there, absolutely. We are a nation of laws, and I love when the FBI gets it right. It's when we're faced with this double standard where Democrats, they get questioned, they get searched, and Republicans get raided.
Beyond the FBI, it's often about Attorney General Merrick Garland, right? Who seemed more than reluctant to move forward with any case against Trump until the documents debacle forced his hand. He has been repeatedly accused of being totally corrupt and politicized.
The most political attorney general in our nation's history. He wants to indict Donald Trump because he hates Donald Trump. He hates him. He's angry. Merrick Garland is angry that he wasn't confirmed to the Supreme Court.
The attorney general is the Svengali behind it all. And the deputy attorney general is the Svengali behind the attorney general.
What did Biden tell Merrick Garland? What did Merrick Garland tell Special Prosecutor Jack Smith?
If Merrick Garland is so determined to get Trump, then how do you explain that same attorney general going to bat for Trump? Yes, over the objection of many on the left. For example, announcing in June of 2021 they would go ahead with a controversial legal effort started under the Trump administration to intervene in a defamation lawsuit brought against Trump by E. Jean Carroll, who says Trump sexually assaulted her in the 1990s. The DOJ argued that Trump made the comments in his role as president, and so the DOJ stepped in to take over his defense. That case still unresolved, though Carroll won a similar suit last month. Many on the left were furious.
It's morally undefensible. It would be holding the president above the law and would force American taxpayers to pay to defend Trump's hateful rhetoric.
Garland is trying to gaslight the nation into saying, like, oh, my hands are tied, I had no choice. No. He had a choice.
As the DOJ continued to fight to defend Trump as the case works its way through the appellate courts, House Democrats demanded Garland defend his decision, and he did.
The job of the Justice Department in making decisions of law is not to back any administration, previous or present. Our job is to represent the American people. And our job in doing so is to ensure adherence to the rule of law.
And last month, the DOJ, led by Merrick Garland, stepped in again, controversially and over the objection of many on the left again, to prevent former President Trump from having to testify, at least for now, in connection with a pair of lawsuits filed by former FBI officials Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, the FBI agents who sued after being removed from the Mueller investigation. And the DOJ won on behalf of Donald Trump to prevent Trump from having to testify, at least for now. The Justice Department successfully convincing the judge that Trump's deposition may not be needed. Again, the left and Strzok and Page's lawyers were furious that the DOJ stepped in. But see, none of this fits with the narrative of a politicized attorney general. Today, when pressed about the charges brought against Trump by special counsel Jack Smith, Garland made similar comments to what he said about the cases where he defended Trump.
My role is completely consistent with the regulations that set forth the responsibilities of the Attorney General under the special counsel regulations, and I followed those regulations.
But the main argument that Trump and his supporters have been making to impugn the FBI has been, well, then what about Hillary Clinton?
Most Republicans believe we live in a country where Hillary Clinton did very similar things and nothing happened to her.
You have a former First Lady, Senator, Secretary of State that had the same situation that nothing was done to her.
The FBI and the DOJ protected her, did not issue subpoenas, did not use a grand jury, did not execute search warrants, and then the corrupt head of the FBI, James Comey, declared no reasonable prosecutor would bring a case. Hillary Clinton broke the law, and she didn't get indicted.
Prosecutors in the Clinton case determined that the evidence, in fact, showed a, quote, lack of intent to communicate classified information on unclassified systems, especially since, quote, none of the emails Clinton received were properly marked to inform her of the classified status of the information. And according to a report from the DOJ Inspector General, who actually investigated the decision not to charge after the fact, prosecutors concluded there was no evidence that the senders or former Secretary Clinton believed or were aware at the time that the emails contained classified information. But what about the more than 30,000 emails which her legal team deemed personal and deleted from the server at her home? That was a mistake to delete what they did. But the Inspector General concluded there was no evidence that Clinton or anyone else intended to conceal, remove, or destroy the emails from government systems.
When caught, Hillary deleted and acid-washed 33,000 emails in defiance of a congressional subpoena. She already had the subpoena. And her aides smashed and destroyed iPhones with a hammer. Yet the FBI and DOJ protected her.
That is actually a reference, the acid wash, to an open source software program they used that happens to be called BleachBit. If you go through every piece of evidence, as prosecutors and the Inspector General did, from the phone that was destroyed to the emails, they didn't believe that there was evidence of a corrupt intent. That is what the law requires. And to those who say, come on, Comey and the FBI clearly had it out for Trump and not for Hillary Clinton. They protected her. The problem with that, of course, is that James Comey announced 11 days before the election they were reopening the Clinton investigation, even though it turned out there was nothing new. And most importantly, the FBI never leaked that there was an ongoing Russia investigation of Donald Trump, which would have significantly hurt his campaign. If the FBI wanted to help Clinton and hurt Trump, they would have leaked the Russia investigation and not announced the reopening of the Clinton investigation right before the election. And I've asked that question of numerous GOP lawmakers making the allegation of FBI corruption, but I never seem to get a particularly compelling response. If the FBI wanted to hurt Donald Trump, as the claim is in 2016 in particular, they wanted him to lose the election, right? Why would James Comey have come out 11 days before the election and announced Hillary Clinton is being investigated again and not leaked the fact that Donald Trump was actually under investigation over a possible connection with the Russians? That didn't happen. I mean, if they were out to get him, that would be the easy way to do it, right?
It probably would, but you look at all the lies Comey told. You know, you can't trust a guy like that puts his hand up and swears that he's going to tell the truth and doesn't tell the truth.
If James Comey and the FBI were so out to get Donald Trump, right, and they were out to protect Hillary Clinton, as the allegation is, why announce 11 days before the election that Hillary Clinton's investigation is being reopened and not leak the fact that Donald Trump is being investigated for his contacts with the Russians?
A couple of reasons why. And I'm going to go back to the Durham report because it was put forward by a special counsel, somebody who, until that report was released, had all of the respect and integrity from all sides of the political apparatus here in Washington, D.C. If you go back to that time period, what happened with Hillary Clinton was a couple of things. One, they were afraid of what the retribution from her if she won the election and became president.
Yeah,
like, I'm not going to judge the legal side of this because I'm not an attorney. I'm going to talk about the political side.
And I'm talking about the political, too. Right? The FBI makes mistakes, and there have been some big ones. And yes, the FBI has been and should be criticized for them, as they have been by the FBI Inspector General, who investigated the Russia investigation, and even the bipartisan Senate Intel Committee report. But neither of those investigations found evidence that politics motivated the errors or the judgment calls. Even John Durham's investigation was theoretically supposed to blow open the politicized corruption in our intel agencies and FBI, and yet it did nothing close to that. So let's stop with the attacks on law enforcement, because that is all that this is. It's the same game that criminal defense attorneys play in other cases, where there's a lot of evidence, they try to change the subject from the evidence found to the supposed corrupt motives of the cops. If there is evidence of politicization, I will be the first one to call it out, as I call out both sides on this sort of stuff. But on this investigation of Donald Trump, it is a talking point without any evidence to back it up. You can legitimately argue these charges should not have been brought, that it's too destructive to the country, it's too divisive, Donald Trump will have a legal defense, fair enough. But what you can't legitimately argue is that this was just a political witch hunt, all part of a larger effort by the Republican-led FBI to bring down Republicans. Good for former Attorney General William Barr for calling it out.
It's a very detailed indictment, and it's very, very damning. And this idea of presenting Trump as a victim here, a victim of a witch hunt, is ridiculous.
And too many of the people who keep saying it know it's not true. I will continue to hold both sides to account for this sort of unsupported and dangerous rhetoric when it comes to attacks on law enforcement. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.